I think we skipped over a story from
Yeah.
Ranger Battalion
Yeah.
that you wanted to talk about.
So, yeah, like before a movie starts, you're like, this is a true story, but some names have been altered to protect the living or protect the dead. So this is one of those. I'll alter the name a little bit, um, out of a tiny little bit of respect. So I was able to uh, volunteer to go to airborne school, and like my recruiter told me, the first day of airborne school, they call you into this classroom and they do the ranger pitch. Who wants to be a ranger? Sign up here. So I sign up. I'm gonna go to RIP afterwards, and I'm happy. Nothing. I get orders to go somewhere, and I'm still a mosquito wing private, right? I got one little hash mark on my collar. I get orders to go somewhere, and I ask my squad leader, "Hey, I'm supposed to be going to RIP. Like I shouldn't be going to get an assignment somewhere." And he's like, "It's just the army. It's the RIP takes precedence. They'll annul those orders, and you'll go to RIP." I'm like, okay. So airborne school ends, and the ranger instructor shows up, and back then the Rangers wore OG 107s, which is the olive green, the solid green drab uniform, the one that you're familiar seeing from Vietnam movies. It's just that green, and it had slanted pockets. It was a badass uniform. It was hot weather jungle uniform, and they had jungle boots that were spit shined, and then they had that black beret. So a ranger stood out. Everyone else was wearing the woodland camouflage, the BDUs. So you stood out dramatically. So this ranger shows up, and he's wearing his OG 107s, starches and spits, looks sharp as hell, and he starts reading off the people that are supposed to go to RIP, and he doesn't read off my name. And they all line up and they start marching to RIP. So from airborne school to that piece of red clay I was talking about, I don't know, maybe it's a mile. It's not very far. And they're marching on their way. And I run up to him and I'm like, "Sergeant, signed up. I'm supposed to go to RIP. You didn't call my name." And he's like, "What's your name?" Looking at his clipboard, like, "You're not on my list. Get the fuck out of my face." And I'm just like, you know. So I run away, and then I go to, my squad leader in airborne school again. I'm like, "Hey, like something got screwed up. I'm not going to RIP, and I've got these orders, and something's wrong." And he says, "Go down to the Patches building and see Mr. Buttersworth." So I'm changing the name slightly. Uh, and I'm like, he's like, he's in charge of records. He might be able to straighten it out for you. So I was at Fort Moore, like I said, a couple weeks ago, and I tried to find the Patches building. I'm not sure if it's still there. I couldn't find it. I didn't have that much time. But where airborne has these big towers that they drop you out of. There was a one story building there, and it had all the patches of the jump units. That's why it was called the Patches building. I'm not sure if it's still there, but many of the listeners are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So my girlfriend at the time, Jules, we jump in her little red Dodge Colt, and it's the middle. Graduation was over from airborne. Dudes are marching to RIP. We drive down to the Patches building, and I walk inside, and it's a building probably 8 times as big as this. Just not that big, but it was all these desks and everything. And there's one dude in the corner, and I come in, I say, "Hey, I'm looking for Mr. Buttersworth." And he says, "Oh, I'm Mr. Buttersworth. What can I do for you?" And I'm thinking, holy crap. Like, he's the only guy. Everyone else is at lunch or something. He's the only guy there. So I'm like, oh, lucky as hell. So I run back to that corner. I'm like, "Hey, I'm supposed to be going to RIP." They're literally like marching by at the time. I'm like, "Hey, something is wrong. My orders didn't, and someone told me that you could fix it." And he says, "Ooh, you think you got what it takes to be a ranger?" I don't have a very good Southern accent, but he's got that Southern. I mean, this guy looked like that prototypical, just pain in the ass Southerner. Really pasty white skin. Just kind of soft, like the plantation owner. You know what I mean? He had everything but the stupid hat. And the guy looked he looked to be my age at the time. He looked to be like in his 50s or something, And I said, I don't know, man. I said, I don't know if I have what it takes to be a ranger. I think that's what Rip is all about. And he kind of looks at me and he says, you might have what it takes to be a ranger. And I'm just like, I tell you what, you can beat me in an arm wrestle. I'll go ahead and cut you orders to go be a ranger. And I'm like, what? He's like, come on, Ranger, you look strong. So I'm freaking out, right? Like I've got orders to go to somewhere, and my again, this idea of a dream of being a ranger or being a man enough to become a ranger. So he clears stuff off of his desk, okay, and he puts his arm up, and we arm wrestle. I'm a 18-year-old kid. I think I was 18 at the time. Joined at 17, turned 18. Uh, he's like, "Oh, you're pretty strong. Let's go 2 out of 3." And I'm like, boom, you know what I mean? And he's like, "Oh, again, that's pretty good." He's like, "Do you wrestle?" And I was like, I wrestled in high school, yeah. He's like, "I'll tell you what, if you can pin me, I'll go ahead and cut you orders to go be a ranger." And I'm just like, what in the world? So we're rearranging furniture. It'd be like having a wrestling match in here. So we're like, it's desks and and it's all, again, the old timers that are listening to this, it's all that old World War II furniture. It's metal with the green pad and the metal World War II fan that's like you know what I mean? We're pushing all this crap away, and he makes a little bit of space, and he says, you want to be on top or bottom? Like the wrestling stance where one guy's on all fours. And I was like, I don't know, the top. So he's like, okay, and we start wrestling, and I turn him over and I pin him. And he's like, oh, you're pretty good, you're pretty good. He's like, how again? I gotta insist on 2 out of 3. If you get, if you can pin me 2 out of 3, I'll cut you some orders to go be a ranger. And I'm just like, let's do it. You know what I mean? So I'm in the middle of this second, trying to get this second pin in, right? And all of a sudden, and I can only describe it, and I don't know if this is PC anymore. All I can describe is suddenly my gaydar goes off. And this guy, I'm like rolling him over to pin him, and he's like, and then it's like everything starts to come. I'm so panicky about not being able to become a ranger. I'm not really, you might have read the signals early on. And I've told this story, and people are like, how did you not see it? I was like, I didn't see it until I felt his dick on my leg. Okay. Like suddenly I'm like, what is happening? And he's like, And I like, I push him off, and I stand up, and he's getting himself and dusting himself off. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? Because I'm still confused. And he sits down in a chair, and he says, you wouldn't hit me. And I was like, the hell I won't. And he's kind of kitty corner from this desk. And I reach over the desk, and I punch him. And I remember it clear as day. I punch him in the mouth, and he flips back in the chair. It's a chair. The chair is on wheels, one of those desk chairs, and it flips back, and I'm over him, and his lip is split, and he's got like a little bit of blood, pouring in, just kind of trickling into his mouth. And I said, he said something like, he's like, ooh, I think you got what it takes to be a ranger. And I'm like, dude, I think I called him a name, and he's like, you go ahead now, your orders will follow. And I said, they better. I said, if I come back here, I'm going to whoop your ass. And he's like, you go ahead now, Ranger. And I come out. I'd taken my uniform off. I was just in a t-shirt, you know what I mean? And I come walking out. This whole thing took like 10, 15 minutes. Like it took longer than I'm able to tell the story, right? I'm soaked with sweat because this is Georgia, the Georgia heat. And I walk out, and my wife is waiting in the car, and I'm soaked with sweat. And she says, what happened? And I was like, I don't want to talk about it. Let's just go. Just take me over to Rip. So she drives me over to Rip, which was maybe a 3-minute drive. And we get there, and I get out, and the cadre yells, "Are you Tiegs?" And I'm like, Roger that, Sergeant. He's like, get over here. So I run in. So Mr. Buttersworth had made that call in that interim. And then that was the rest of the story. Almost. So this is 1987, 1988, right? So now I've told this story over and over and over. And some people are like, bullshit. I'm like, whatever. You don't have to believe it. I'm telling the story now. And I don't know the guy's name. I know it now. And here's why. I'm standing, it's called Building 4, which is it's the officer building, not officer building, but it's the training building where all the infantry officers go through. So now it's 1997. Okay, I'm a second lieutenant, and I'm going through officer training at Fort Benning, and I'm in Building 4, and I'm telling this story about this Southern gentleman who I had to wrestle to get my Ranger contract. And there's a bunch of dudes, and we're all standing there, and I'm telling the story, and he walks past, and I said, "That's the guy." It's like that's the guy. And a bunch of them turn around and they're like, "Oh, that's Mr. Buttersworth. Yeah, he's again. I don't know if this is a PC anymore. He's queer as a $3 bill. He wrestles everybody." And I had this Me Too movement sense of like relief and disgust because I was like, "Oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who got molested by this old man." But then it was the other thing was like, and nobody cares. How does he get away with it? So he walks by, and then I get to know his name. And at this point now, 10 years later, he has been promoted. He's in charge of officer records at Fort Benning. You know, so he's just now this staple of Fort Benning and the infantry officers course, where we were talking a little bit about jujitsu. It's where jujitsu was just getting introduced. The modern combatives was just getting introduced. So a couple times a week at Fort Benning in the training course, we would go and have a modern combative session, and we would do jujitsu, and we do it in uniform. And this dude would show up, and he would show up in his, in the old gray sweatpants and like a white t-shirt, no underpants on, dude. And you want to know why I knew there were no underpants? Because I could see the twigs and berries. Like it was very clear if he was hanging left or right. So he's in there doing jujitsu with all these infantry officers, and I would stand here on the sidelines at this level of voice. This doesn't bother anyone. This old man rubbing his dick on all of us, like this. No one else sees what I'm seeing, and he's down there rolling. He's just like, you know what I mean? And I was like, what is happening? Like no one else is bothered by this. I did that probably 5 times in the course of seeing this guy. Story's almost over, not quite. So I'm going through the officer course, and I get awarded. I win something, and I get awarded Pathfinder School, and I want to get to Fort Lewis to go to the Second Ranger Battalion where I'm going to go work as a lieutenant. And my wife Jules is pregnant with our son, and I need to get there. His birthday is in November, so this is the late summer or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but I needed to get to Fort. I didn't have time to do Pathfinder School. Was my point. Pathfinder School was like 6 weeks long or 8 weeks long or whatever it was, and I was like, dude, I know I was awarded this. I don't want it. Give it to someone else. I need to get up to Fort Lewis and get settled because my wife is going to have a baby, and we want to have all that put together. And I'd been talking about that for months, and I was going to talk to Mr. Buttersworth about this stuff. And I never brought up our previous history other than like pointing out the open molestation that was happening during Army combatives. Well, now it's the day we graduate from the infantry officer basic course, and we're ready to move. Like literally, the movers are at our house, and I go in to see him, and he's supposed to have my orders amended, so not go to Pathfinder School, go directly to Second Ranger Battalion, and they're not done. So I'm in his office, and I look around, and I shut the door, and I call him by his first name, and I said, "Do you remember me from a few years ago?" And he said, "Oh, I remember you, Ranger." I said, "Okay, I'm going to come back after lunch, and if you don't have my orders straight, that ass whooping that I threatened you with 10 years ago is going to come. I don't understand what's going on, but get my shit straight, you know, which was a risk. You know what I mean? Pretty, not the appropriate thing to do. And he's like, you go ahead, Ranger. You come back after lunch. Your orders will be here. So I go back and I go get something to eat with my wife, who's extremely pregnant. And I come back to his office after lunch and he wasn't there, but my orders were sitting front and center on his desk to go to Fort Lewis. And then that ended my experience with Mr. Buttersworth.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interview. As you could probably tell, this is a brand new channel. So if you got anything out of this at all, please like the video, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought, tell me who you'd like to see on the show. I see every like, I read every comment, and I appreciate all of it, especially in the beginning, because as you know, that kind of support goes a long way on these platforms. So most importantly, I have some awesome guests coming up in the future for interviews. So please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. But again, thank you for your time. Appreciate the support and hope to see you again soon.